Welcome. Today we are going to explore something that lives quietly at the center of so many adult struggles, something that most people have never been given the words to describe, but that they feel every single day. We are going to talk about emotional suppression in childhood and how it becomes the hidden root of avoidant attachment in adult life. This is not a clinical lecture, this is an honest conversation, and if you find yourself recognizing your own story in these words, I want you to know that that recognition is itself the beginning of something important. Let us start at the very beginning, because that is the only place this story can truly start. When a human being is born, they arrive in the world completely and utterly dependent, not just for food and warmth and physical safety, but for something even more fundamental: emotional regulation. A newborn does not have the neurological capacity to calm itself, to make sense of its own distress, to move from panic to peace on its own. It needs a nervous system outside itself to do that. It needs a caregiver who can look at the crying baby and say, with their presence, with their tone, with their body, I see you, I hear you, I am here, you are safe. When that happens consistently, something remarkable begins to build inside the child. Not just comfort in the moment, but a belief, a deep, embodied, wordless belief that the world is responsive, that needs can be expressed and met, that emotions are safe to have and safe to show, that other people can be trusted. This is the foundation of what we call secure attachment, and it is not built in grand gestures. It is built in 10,000 ordinary moments of a caregiver showing up when the child cries, of a parent making eye contact when the child reaches out, of an adult saying, I know you are sad, come here, without turning away. But now let us look at the other story, because for many people, that is not how it went. Maybe the caregiver was there physically, but not emotionally, present in the room but unreachable in any meaningful sense. Maybe they were dealing with their own unprocessed grief, their own depression, their own anxiety, their own trauma from a childhood that was never addressed. Maybe they had been raised in a family where emotions were seen as weakness, where crying was met with irritation or contempt, where vulnerability was something to be ashamed of rather than something to be gently received. And so when this child came to that caregiver with big feelings, what happened? Maybe the caregiver turned away. Maybe they said, stop crying. There is nothing to cry about. Maybe they got frustrated or went silent or became someone the child needed to take care of rather than being taken care of by. Maybe there was no outright rejection, just a consistent, low-level absence, a parent who was always distracted, always busy, always somewhere else, emotionally, even when they were standing right in front of you. The child in this environment faces an impossible bind. The emotions do not stop. Emotions are biological. They arise in the body, whether we want them to or not. The child cannot choose not to feel, but the child can, and does, choose not to show, because showing led to nothing good. Showing led to rejection or dismissal, or the terrifying experience of seeing the caregiver become overwhelmed or angry, and so the child learns, at a level far below conscious thought, that the safe strategy is suppression. Do not cry, do not need, do not ask, manage it yourself, be small, be quiet, be fine. This is not a decision the child makes with their rational mind. It is a conclusion the nervous system draws from repeated experience. It is learning in the most primal sense, not academic learning, but survival learning. And survival learning is the most durable kind. It writes itself into the body, into the patterns of breathing, into the set of the jaw, into the habit of scanning a room before entering it to check whether it is emotionally safe. It writes itself into who the child becomes. I want you to sit with this for a moment, because I think it is important to feel the full weight of what this means for a child. The suppression that looks like composure, that adults sometimes even praise. What a good, easy child, she never makes a fuss, is actually a form of profound loneliness. The child who has learned not to reach out is not a child who no longer needs. They are a child who has given up on the possibility of being received. They have concluded, from the only evidence available to them, that their emotional world is not welcome here, that they are too much, that they are alone in their interior life, and they carry that conclusion forward into adolescence, into adulthood, into every relationship they will ever form. This is how avoidant attachment is born, not in a single traumatic event, though sometimes trauma is part of the story, but in the slow, accumulating pattern of an emotional world that was repeatedly not met. The avoidantly attached adult did not emerge from childhood cold, or uncaring, or emotionally dead. They emerged armored. There is a crucial difference. Armor is not the absence of a body. It is protection for a body that learned the world was dangerous. Let us look at what this actually looks like in adult life, because I want to be specific here. The avoidantly attached adult often looks incredibly capable on the outside. They are frequently high achievers. They are often described as independent, reliable, not needy. They handle crises with composure. They do not ask for help easily. They may be genuinely skilled at their work, at solving problems, at being the person others come to in difficult times, because they learned early that being useful was safer than being vulnerable. But in intimate relationships, the picture is more complicated. When a partner comes to them with emotional need, with tears, with fear, with a deep longing for closeness, something happens inside the avoidant person that they often cannot explain. There is a pulling away, a wanting to fix the problem and move on, a discomfort with prolonged emotional intensity that can feel almost physical. They might change the subject. They might offer advice when what was asked for was empathy. They might need to leave the room, or go for a walk, or find something productive to do, anything that creates a little space between themselves and the emotional wave that is coming toward them. And here is what makes this so painful and so confusing for everyone involved. The avoidant person is usually not doing this out of a lack of love. Often they are doing it because intimacy activates in them an old alarm system. Because closeness, real closeness, the kind that requires you to be seen and known and vulnerable, feels at a deep neurological level like the dangerous territory of childhood, the place where needs were ignored, the place where emotions were punished. The nervous system does not know that time has passed. It does not know that this partner is not that parent. It only knows what it learned, that emotional closeness is a place where you get hurt. And so the cycle begins. The avoidant person pulls back. Their partner, often someone with anxious attachment who is exquisitely sensitive to signs of abandonment, feels the withdrawal and panics, and reaches harder, needing more reassurance, more closeness, more response, which causes the avoidant person to feel more overwhelmed, more suffocated, more desperate for space, which causes the anxious partner to reach even harder, pursue and withdraw, pursue and withdraw. Two people who both want love, both terrified in different ways of what love requires. I want to stay here for a moment because I think it is important to name what is happening on the inside of the avoidant person during these moments, because it is often invisible even to themselves. There is frequently a genuine confusion about what they feel, a kind of blankness or numbness when asked, "What is going on for you emotionally right now?" This is not performance. This is not stonewalling for effect. For many people with avoidant attachment, the internal emotional landscape is genuinely difficult to access. The suppression that began in childhood did not just suppress the expression of emotion, it suppressed the awareness of it. This is a phenomenon researchers have studied and named. It is called alexithymia, a reduced ability to identify, name, and describe one's own emotional states. And it is remarkably common among people who grew up in environments where emotions were not safe to have. When a child's emotional experience is repeatedly ignored, minimized, or punished, the neural pathways that support emotional self-awareness simply do not develop in the same way as they do in children, whose emotional lives are regularly witnessed and validated. The person grows up with a limited internal vocabulary for feeling. They know they are uncomfortable. They often do not know what kind of uncomfortable, or why, or what it needs. Ask someone with alexithymia to simply open up and share their feelings, and you have asked them to read a book in a language they were never taught. The desire may absolutely be there. The capacity has to be built from scratch, and it takes time and patience and safety. Now let us talk about what suppression does to the body, because this is something I think is deeply underappreciated. When we push an emotion down, when we override the impulse to cry, when we clench the jaw against fear, when we breathe shallowly to keep the grief from rising, we do not eliminate that emotion. We relocate it. The body holds what the mind refuses to process. Undigested emotional experience lives in the tissues, in the chronic tightness between the shoulder blades, in the gut that is always slightly clenched, in the headaches that arrive when the stress finally has nowhere else to go, in the exhaustion that comes not from physical exertion, but from the constant low-level effort of keeping the lid on everything. Research in somatic psychology and trauma has made this clear. The body keeps the score, not as a metaphor, but as a literal physiological fact. And this means that for people with long histories of emotional suppression, healing is not only a cognitive process. It is not enough to understand intellectually why you do what you do. The body needs to be part of the work. The held breath needs to be released. The clenched muscles need to learn that they do not have to protect anymore. The nervous system needs new experiences of safety, experiences that are repeated often enough and felt deeply enough to begin rewriting what it believes is true. This is why talk therapy alone is sometimes not sufficient for deep healing from childhood emotional suppression. And why approaches that include the body, somatic work, EMDR, sensoromotor psychotherapy, even mindful movement, can reach places that words alone cannot touch. Let us now turn toward healing, because this is ultimately why any of us do this work. Not to dwell in what was hard, but to find our way to something different. The first, and in many ways, most important step in healing from avoidant attachment rooted in childhood emotional suppression is compassion. Not abstract compassion, not performed compassion, but specific, directed, heartfelt compassion for the child you once were. This is harder than it sounds. Many adults with avoidant patterns have internalized the same dismissive message they received in childhood and now apply it to themselves. They see their own history and think, it was not that bad. Other people had it worse. I should not need to process this. I am over it. But the child in you is not over it. The child in you is still living in the environment that taught you to shut down. And the healing begins when the adult you finally turns toward that child and says, perhaps for the first time, I see you. What you felt was real. What you needed was legitimate. You were not too much. You were not a burden. You were a child who deserved to be met, and you were not met, and that was not your fault. This is inner child work, and it is not soft or sentimental. It is among the most rigorous psychological work a person can do, because it requires sitting with grief, the grief of what was not given, without immediately suppressing it, which is, of course, exactly what the old pattern will urge you to do. Therapy is an extraordinarily powerful container for this work, specifically attachment-informed therapy, which understands that the therapeutic relationship itself is part of the medicine. Because when you sit across from a therapist who consistently receives your emotional experience without flinching, without withdrawing, without needing you to manage their feelings about your feelings, you are having a corrective experience. Your nervous system is getting new data. It is learning that emotional expression does not have to end in rejection, that being seen does not have to end in abandonment, that it is survivable to let someone know what is happening inside you. This learning is slow. It does not happen in 1 session or 10 sessions or sometimes even 100. The nervous system changes through repetition, through accumulated experience of safety. But it changes. The brain is plastic. The patterns that were written in childhood can be rewritten in adulthood. Not erased. The old pathways remain, but new pathways can be built alongside them. Pathways that say, it is okay to feel this. It is okay to need this. You are not alone. Outside of therapy, there are practices that support this work. Journaling can be powerful, not journaling as performance, not journaling to produce something coherent and polished, but journaling as a raw, honest conversation with the self. Starting with the simplest possible question, what am I feeling right now? And staying with that question long enough to receive an honest answer, even if the honest answer is that you do not know, that you feel blank, that you feel a kind of pressure in your chest that you cannot name. The willingness to stay with the question is itself the practice. It builds the internal vocabulary that was never built in childhood. Mindfulness, practiced in a particular way, can also be deeply supportive. Not mindfulness as a technique for rising above emotion, which is, ironically, something avoidant people are often already quite good at, because dissociation from feeling is a form of distance, and distance is familiar, but mindfulness as a practice of turning gently toward what is present, noticing sensation in the body, naming it without judgment, allowing it to be there for a few seconds without immediately moving to make it go away. The emotion that is witnessed changes. The emotion that is suppressed stays exactly as it is. For those in relationships with avoidant people, and I know that many of you are in this position, and that it is exhausting and painful, I want to offer something. Your partner's withdrawal is not evidence that you are not loved. It is evidence that they are frightened. The fear may not look like fear. It may look like irritability or silence, or a sudden interest in being very busy. But underneath the wall, there is almost always a person who wants connection and does not know how to survive it. That does not mean you should stay in a dynamic that is chronically unfulfilling. Your needs matter. Your longing for closeness is not pathological. It is human, and a relationship where one person consistently cannot show up emotionally is genuinely difficult to sustain. What it does mean is that your most effective responses are those that come from a place of understanding rather than reaction. When you can say to an avoidant partner, "I notice you have gone quiet. I am not trying to corner you. I just want to understand what is happening for you," that lands very differently than "You always do this. You never let me in." The first creates a small opening. The second confirms the old belief that emotional territory is a battlefield. For the person with avoidant attachment who is listening and recognizing themselves in this, I want to say something directly to you. You are not broken. The strategies you developed were rational responses to the environment you were in. You survived. That matters. And the work now is not to tear down everything you built. It is to slowly, one small moment at a time, allow yourself to discover that the world is larger than the world you knew as a child, that there are people who will not leave when you let them in, that the discomfort of closeness, while real and while valid, is not the same as danger, that you can feel it and stay anyway, that staying is not the same as losing yourself. The invitation of all of this work, the therapy, the somatic practice, the inner child work, the mindfulness, the courageous conversations in relationships, is ultimately the same invitation. It is the invitation to come home to yourself, to stop being a stranger to your own interior life, to allow the full range of your emotional experience to exist without immediately shutting it down. Not because emotion is always comfortable, it is not. Not because vulnerability is easy, it is among the hardest things a human being can do, but because the alternative is a life that is technically functional and inwardly lonely, a life managed from behind glass. And you were not born for that. None of us were. We were born for the messy, terrifying, irreplaceable experience of being truly known, of letting someone see us not in our best moments but in our most honest ones, and discovering that we are still here, still okay, still loved. The child who learned to suppress was doing the only thing they knew how to do. The adult you are now has a different set of choices, and one of those choices, perhaps the most important one, is to go back for that child, not to drag them into forced openness, not to demand that they trust overnight, but to sit beside them and say, "I know it did not feel safe then. It is going to be a little different now. I am not going anywhere." And then to stay, to keep showing up for yourself the way you needed someone to show up for you, day by day, breath by breath, one small act of emotional honesty at a time. That is where the healing lives, not in a single breakthrough, not in one perfect conversation, not in finally understanding the theory of it all, but in the daily practice of remaining present to your own life, in choosing again and again to be a person who feels rather than a person who manages, in learning, slowly and with great gentleness, that you are allowed to be here, fully and honestly, and without apology. Thank you for being here today. Whatever you carry, whatever your childhood taught you to hide, I hope this conversation offered you a small opening, a little more light in the room where you keep the things you learned not to show. You deserve that light. You always did.